Hey guys, it is finally time for our semester 2 final review. And first of all, I just want to thank you guys for a great year. I've really loved having you guys in class and just getting to know you guys both in the classroom and through videos and that kind of thing. So what we're going to do in this lecture, I shouldn't even call it a lecture. I don't know why I did. All we're doing is I'm going to talk about specifically what you really need to know for the final. So I just want to start off with a few general things about the final exam. There are two parts to this final, similar to what we saw in the first semester. And I'm actually going to give you guys both parts at once, so it really doesn't matter which part is part 1 and part 2. But the multiple choice portion, it's going to differ a little bit from what we've done multiple choice wise earlier in this semester, where I'm not grading your work. This is strictly going to be on what you guys put in on the Scantron. Yes, it's a Scantron. You don't need your iPad. Okay, but there are 40 multiple choice questions, and of course our favorite E, none of the above, will be an option. This other part of the test is a free response portion, and that means that I'm grading all of your work in addition to the correct answer, and there are going to be 13 free response problems on there. And I would definitely make sure that you know all those concepts because that is worth a decent amount of the final. And obviously, since this is an honors class, there is no note card. There's my lame attempt at a sad face. But the good news is I'm actually going to give to you a sheet of paper that has the reciprocal and the Pythagorean identities. And before you complain that those are the ones you already know, the reason why I'm giving those two to you is because there are no sections on the final that are strictly on the knowledge of those particular identities. There's only problems where you need to go ahead and actually use them. So that's why I'm giving those to you. So that's a little bit in general about the final. You guys should be in great shape in terms of time. And now I'm going to start by talking about the free response and what you guys need to know for that. So with the free response, I'm going to detail kind of the types of problems you're going to need to know. And I want to stress to you guys, you have lots of things that you can do to help you out. Obviously, we have the review worksheet that I have put on my Aloo. Secondly, we have each chapter review worksheet with the key posted. I also have all of the review videos from the entire year still posted and all the lectures. So you guys have a lot of resources. In addition to that, if you guys are struggling on something, please email me and I would be happy to make a video for you on that specific problem or on that topic. Or it might be a simple email saying, hey, don't worry about that. So please make sure you guys are communicating. Okay, back to the free response. The first few problems on the free response are dealing with conic sections. And not only will you need to identify them, but you will need to list all the characteristics and graph them. And so I would definitely spend some time making sure you know all 4 of our conic sections: circle, hyperbola, parabola, ellipse. Also make sure you guys know how to complete the square, how to deal with square roots, and how to deal with inequalities. The next few problems are going to be what I call a trig chart. And while that's really general, let me just kind of explain further what I mean by that. So there's going to be a chart that lists out all 6 trig functions, and there's going to be 3 different types of problems. Okay, the first type of problem is going to be something like 3, -4, where we have an ordered pair. You guys need to know how to draw that, how to find the missing side, and then how to find all 6 trig functions using SOHCAHTOA. The second type of problem, it might actually tell you, okay, well, what if theta is 330 degrees? So that is knowing our special angles and knowing all students take calculus and figuring out what should be positive and what should be negative. The final type of problem, it might say, okay, it's in quadrant 2 and sine of theta is equal to let's say radical 2 over 2. So you would need to use the fact that sine would be opposite over hypotenuse and draw it out in quadrant 2 using the correct signs for all those sides. Okay, so this really all goes back to chapter 13, so make sure you guys know how to draw out triangles for all 3 types of those problems. The next type of problem that we're going to see are dealing with trig word problems. And you guys will see both right triangles and non-right triangles. So that means I need to know how to set up things with SOHCAHTOA. I need to know law of sines, possibly law of cosines. Okay, so this goes back to chapter 13 as well. I would say, I'll let you know there's 3 word problems on there. 2 of them are very straightforward and one of them takes a little bit more time and effort and a little bit more thought. And last but not least, on the free response stuff, we have simplifying trig expressions, which is something that we just did in chapter 14. So that should be pretty fresh in our minds. So keep in mind, I'm giving you the reciprocal and Pythagorean identities. So when you practice those, make sure you know them. So that sums up the free response. And now we're going to talk about the multiple choice. First thing I just want to highlight to you guys, make sure you have your graphing calculator, that it is in degree mode, that you have batteries that function, and just continue to work through that. So now I'm going to go chapter by chapter and highlight the things you guys need to know. I promise you, if I don't talk about something, don't worry about it. On the multiple choice review worksheet you guys have, there are a ton of problems that, not a ton, but there are some concepts that are not going to be on our final exam. So if I don't talk about them today, don't worry about doing them. So we're going to start with chapter 7, which seems like years and years and years ago. And the first thing you guys need to know is how to simplify radicals, and that's when we make a factor tree. We have to make sure that we have groups of 2 if it's a square root, groups of 3 if it's a cube root, and that's how we go ahead and simplify that. The next thing is dealing with functions. Okay, that's what a lot of chapter 7 was about. And you guys need to know how to do composition of functions. And just a reminder, that was when we had things like f of g of x. Okay, and we had to input one function into the other function. The other function concept that is on there is inverse functions. And remember, that's when we use the phrase switch and solve. Okay, so that meant we were switching x and y and then solving my equation for y. The final concept from chapter 7 was solving equations with radicals. And a few key things on that. Remember, we had to isolate radicals before we raised them to a power. Also, sometimes we got extraneous solutions from raising things to a power. So you need to make sure that you are double checking your answer to verify that it actually works in our equation. So that is chapter 7. Chapter 8 was our logarithm chapter, and before you guys freak out and think, oh my gosh, that was so hard, I want to stress that in general for a final exam in math, obviously, a final exam is more difficult than a chapter test because of the amount of topics we need to learn. However, I would say that on an individual chapter test, we go through much more difficult questions than we will see on a final exam. So if logarithms were really tough for you, keep in mind that the type of question on the final would be more a medium level question versus a really, really tough question. The first thing you guys really need to know is just the definition of a logarithm and how do we convert things back and forth from exponential form to logarithmic form. So what I mean by that is if we had something like b to the x equals a, this would become log base b of a equals x. So just kind of remembering that definition of a logarithm and being able to convert things back and forth. The second thing you guys need to know is how to do change of base. And just to review that, if I had, I'm just making this up, like log base 7 of 2, we learned that there's only 2 bases we can put into our calculator. A base of 10, which is our common logarithm, and a base of e, which is our natural logarithm, or ln. If I want to do anything else, I need to use change of base, which would make this log of 2 divided by log of 7, and then we're good to go, and we can put that in our calculator. We also need to know how to condense a logarithm, and in order to do that, there are 3 properties we need to know. The first is our product property, and that means if I had something like log of x plus log of y, it would become log of xy. So we learned that addition and multiplication go together. Our quotient property, log of x minus log of y, we know that subtraction goes with division, so this would be log of x divided by y. The final one is our power property, so if I had something like log of a to the b power, we can bring that exponent out in front, and it becomes b times the log of a. So we need to know those properties not only to condense, but also to go ahead and do our last type of problem, which is to solve exponential equations. And we learned 2 different methods to do this. Okay, one would utilize this concept of changing from exponential form into logarithmic form, and we would need to use that definition and then go ahead and know our change of base. The second way would be to take a log of both sides. Okay, and if I'm taking a log of both sides, we often have to go ahead and use our power property and put the exponent out in front and then divide both sides by that logarithm to isolate whatever our variable is. Okay, so I'd really advise you guys looking back through chapter 8. I promise the ones where we are dividing or where we are solving are pretty straightforward. They are not ones where we have to factor or condense or anything like that. Okay, if you guys know how to do something like 3 to the x minus 1 plus 7 equals 20, if you could solve something like that, you will be in good shape. Chapter 9 was when we dealt with rational expressions and rational equations. So the first thing you guys need to know is how to multiply rational expressions. And that was when we really tried to factor before we canceled stuff out. This is when we talked about like the binomial dating and they don't cancel out unless they go together. Okay, so just important things to remember. The next concept is adding or subtracting rational expressions. And remember, in order to do that, we needed to get a common denominator. So we had to find an LCD and figure out what we were missing. And we actually practiced this a lot in the previous chapter, in chapter 14. So that should be a good refresher for us. This was the chapter that we also got introduced to complex fractions. And remember, our goal with complex fractions, we learned 2 different ways. My personal favorite way is to multiply everything by the overall LCD, and that helps get rid of my fractions in my fraction, because that's what a complex fraction is. It means we have fractions in our numerator and fractions in our denominator. Lastly, you guys need to know how to solve rational equations. That's when we multiplied everything by the LCD and it canceled out our fractions. Then we could go ahead and solve. Now, the tough thing is that we had to remember to double check our answers by substituting into the denominator. I know if one of my answers made the denominator 0, then it was an extraneous solution. Now, quite honestly, from year to year, I switched 10 and 11. So by chapter 10 here, what I really mean is the conic stuff. And I think that the conic section problems on our final, on the multiple choice part, are the easiest ones on the entire test. All you guys need to know how to do on this portion is identify what type of conic section do you have. Okay, so it will give you an equation and you need to determine, is that a hyperbola, is it a parabola, is it a circle, or is it an ellipse? So for chapter 11 on sequences and series, you guys basically need to know arithmetic sequence, arithmetic sum, geometric sequence, and geometric sum. Okay, so these are the 4 things you guys need to know. Just a reminder, arithmetic, we know that means that there is a common difference. So I'm adding the same thing each time to get to the next term. Geometric means that there is a common ratio, so we are multiplying to get to the next term. The big thing on this, you guys, I promise that the problems are pretty easy. The key thing is that I know the formulas and how to substitute into them. So let's go ahead and I'm going to list the 4 formulas you guys need to know. So these are the 4 formulas you guys need to know. A sub n equals a sub 1 plus n minus 1 times d. That's what we use when we are finding the nth term of an arithmetic sequence. S sub n equals n over 2 times 2 a sub 1 plus n minus 1 times d. That's what we're using when we find the sum. And some of you guys might be thinking, wait, didn't we have 2 sum formulas? And you're correct. However, I'm letting you know this is definitely the one that you would need to use on our final. Geometric sequence, a sub n equals a sub 1 times r to the n minus 1 power. And lastly, our geometric sum, s sub n equals a sub 1 times 1 minus r to the nth over 1 minus r. Key things I want to stress to you guys. I understand that depending on when you're watching this, our final may be a ways away still. I would suggest that you guys make flashcards right away of all the formulas that you need to memorize. Math is not a subject that you can cram for, and I'm definitely not advocating that you cram for any of your finals. However, math gets tougher because it's not just memorization, but it is also application. So my suggestion is make flashcards with these formulas and start learning those now. Even if that's all you're studying today, study them. So that way when you're doing the bulk of your studying, you already have those down and you can just focus on how to use the formulas. Chapter 13, so now we're moving more into the trig stuff that we have recently gone through. And the first type of problem you guys are going to have is what I think is the second easiest section on the final, and that is doing trig calculator problems. So make sure you guys work on that, study that, know how to do it. Next thing you guys need to know, you need to know how to find exact values. And that's really using our special triangles. Okay, so make sure we know our special triangles. We know, or if you memorize the 9 trig functions, that's totally fine as well. And we need to know, all students take calculus, to know, depending on what quadrant our angle's in, if our trig function should be positive or negative. Final thing you guys need to know from chapter 13 is knowing how to solve non-right triangles, and that involves 2 things, the law of sines and the law of cosines. So here are those 2 formulas. You guys need to have those memorized. Remember, with law of sines, it is always the sine of any angle over its opposite side. With law of cosines, the key thing is whatever angle I'm using, I'm putting that opposite side on the left side of the equation. Just a general reminder, when we're working with 2 angles, we use law of sines. When I'm working with only 1 angle, that's when I would use law of cosines. And here we are at our final chapter, chapter 14. And I've already kind of told you from chapter 14, the reciprocal and Pythagorean identities will be given to you. And please pay attention to what I'm saying about chapter 14, because I'm definitely going to cut what you need to know. Not in half. I don't know why I was going to say cut in half, but I'm going to definitely lessen it for you. First thing you guys need to know are the double angle formulas, and you need to know them, like there's going to be a matching section where you need to know them, and secondly, you need to know how to use them. So let's just review. I know sine of the double angle is 2 sine cosine. Cosine of the double angle, we learned 2 different formulas, but if you guys know cosine squared minus sine squared, you're in good shape. And then tan of our double angle, I know, is 2 tan over 1 minus tan squared. Okay, so those are the double angle formulas. We need to know those and know how to use them. The other concept on the multiple choice from chapter 14 is knowing sum and difference. So just a reminder, sine of alpha plus or minus beta is sine, cosine, cosine, sine. And yes, if you forget these, you can watch the lovely video that I made making fun of myself by saying these. The key thing, though, is that plus or minus means whatever I have here, I'm going to also put here. Cosine of alpha plus or minus beta is cosine, cosine, sine, sine. And in between those terms, I'm going to write minus plus. And just a reminder that minus plus means that I'm doing the opposite value. Lastly, tangent. This is the fun one. We have tan, tan, 1 tan, tan. And I know that in the numerator, I have the same sign, so I'm going to write plus or minus. And in the denominator, I have the opposite, which is minus plus. So, hopefully this just clarifies exactly what you guys need to know. Continue to study and just do your best. Remember, you guys have lots of resources. You have all the review worksheets. You have all the review videos. You have all the lecture videos. You also have me as a resource, so please do not hesitate if you're struggling on anything to let me know so that I can help you out with it.